So welcome to the session, Business Rules, the Technical Components of AQuest. I am Shirley Vargas, School Transformation Officer and Administrator for School and District Support. And I'm joined by my colleague, Lane Carr, who's the Administrator for the Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives. And today, we are going to tour some of those AQuest business rules. And we want to make sure everyone is aware that these are still in draft form. And we'll just be sharing some of the highlights related to the business rules for classifications as well as designations that will be happening in, a few weeks, right? So really excited about that. The other objective that we have is to highlight some resources around the accountability data. So we want to make sure that there is clear understanding of where to obtain different reports, what are the things you have access to on the NDE portal and how we get to that, and ensure that we also provide an opportunity for two of our colleagues, Ali Martinez-Wilkinson, who will talk about the NSCAS Group platform and some of the reports that are available there, and also our colleague, Allison Denbesi, who will talk to us about the platform for ALPA 21 assessment. So I'm going to turn it over to Lane, who's going to jump right into the business rule work.
Yes, fantastic. Good morning, everybody. Once again, it's good to see you all. Happy Friday. And to those who are joining us at a later time, happy whatever day you're watching this. So we are going to jump right into the business rules. And I want to let you know now that Shirley and I are going to be handing off control of the screen. So there might be just some momentary pauses as we switch screens. So the first thing that I wanted to just ground ourselves in is, what are business rules? Business rules aren't unique to education. They're actually used throughout processes in corporations, in manufacturing, et cetera. They lay out consistent instructions for us for the process, the operation, the calculation, and then the use ultimately. It creates consistency, right? To have agreed upon ways for us to measure and account for any strange things or anomalies and special circumstances. We know that, like, trying to have an accountability system for a state that has a district with 50-some thousand students and a district with 50,000 students is very difficult. And we try to approach that in these draft business rules as best as we can, knowing that there are special circumstances, there are unique issues that are created. They really serve as the mechanics for our accountability and classifications and designations. So we have all of these data, and we're kind of going backwards today. We're going to talk about what do we do with all of these data, and then we're going to show you some of the resources and the data as well. So just as a reminder, there's two sets of business rules here. There's two things that are going on. We have a set of business rules for our classifications, that excellent, great, good, and needs improvement. And those have been around for quite a while. Talks about things like how we bring all of these indicators together. Talks about specific instances for assessment. Again, we're going to get in quite a bit of depth on those. Our newer business rules are about the outside too, specifically comprehensive support and improvement and targeted support and improvement. And those two are much easier for us to follow often because they do use a ranking system where we look at comparisons of student groups or the whole school specifically to other comparison groups. So we'll talk about those here in just a moment. And again, as I mentioned, just keep in mind that these are draft for now. So as I mentioned, there are sort of two sets of corresponding business rules. The first, we always start with the classification business rules because that describes the use of the indicators. Those are the ones we'll start with today. And then we'll walk through the ESSA designation ones or the ones here as well. I did mention that it's like sort of easier to follow with the federal business rules because on the next slide, this should look familiar. These are our filtering systems, that system by which we designate schools for specific support. So what you'll see is, it's abundantly clear. We look at a specific set of schools, a specific number, and a specific cut point, and if it's below that, then that moves into the second filter. So that is a much easier to follow. You'll see our ESSA designation rules are much shorter. So we're actually going to just jump right in. I'm going to take control of the screen here and share with you a little bit about the ESSA classification business rules. Shirley, can you give me a thumbs up that you see these slides? Perfect. Okay. So this is basically like version 3.0 of these. They've been updated this summer, and you'll note that we are tracking changes in here. What I have done is sort of highlighted some of the noteworthy things that I want to walk you through. And like we did yesterday with our previous sessions, if you have specific questions, please do put them in the chat, and surely maybe I'll have you sort of monitor that for us. The first notable thing that I wanted to point out is a slight name change in our lowest classification. This was brought about by our board, our state board, in position statement S2, where they're trying to create some consistency between comprehensive support and improvement and this idea of needs support to improve. So our lowest classification will be titled Needs Support to Improve for this fall. You'll see that reflected in our graphics. You'll see that reflected on the NEP and the NEP Secure, etc. I want to just highlight a couple of key things throughout this document. The first is that there are some nuances to our schools. So we know that not every school is the same. And we know that not every district is the same. There's different sized students, different demographics, communities, schools within communities, etc. One interesting thing is, how do we account for, and we must account for, schools that serve students that may not take the NSCAS assessment? So there are multiple districts that have K through 2 levels of elementary schools, or K through 2 only buildings. And our original AQuest advisory group sort of problem solved around this. It's not a perfect solution, you all, and I will just admit that. However, it is a solution, and I'm always willing to take feedback on how to make this better. But for a K through 2 school, there's no NSCAS assessments, and therefore the district's status is applied to that K through 2 school. So for example, if a district was rated as good, that K through 2 school would get the good status. So that's one nuance that I wanted to add there. Another important thing that I wanted to point out here is that sometimes we may have a secondary school, or we may have a junior, senior high school that is in one building. However, ESSA requires us, and our state law requires us, to think about the grade bands and to cut those schools up into elementary, middle, and high school. So oftentimes they're in our smaller schools or rural communities, there may be one building, and we cut it into 2 schools to give us that that middle and that high school. We actually allow districts to tell us what that cut should be. So it may be a 5 through 12 building, and you'll say we want 5 through 8 to be the middle school, or 6-8 to be the middle school, and the others to go down to the elementary. If you're unsure how your school is cut, you can always reach out to me. It's just lane.carr@nebraska.gov, and I'll be able to tell you what that split is. That was one that was established a while ago, and then we've sort of just kept that moving on. Fantastic. I'm going to actually take the comments off for now. We have some good feedback in here for now. And I want to talk a little bit about status. So we're now moving into the indicators. This was sort of up above. This front matter was about the schools that are eligible. This bottom part now gets into the indicators. So the first indicator is status, which, as we mentioned, is basically the percentage of students who scored on track, or what we now call advanced. On track and advanced, it was formerly college ready and college and career ready. We've changed that name to advanced. So the top 2 performance levels are considered proficient in math and English language arts. So it's important to note this status specifically focuses in on math and English language arts. One nuance that I wanted to point out here, this is a really important piece that actually carried over from No Child Left Behind, is this concept of full academic year, or known as FAE. So it makes sense that a school should be held accountable only for the students that they've been able to move, instruct, intervene, as the case may be, and otherwise provide supports for. So we look at that October snapshot through the time that that student takes the assessment. And if they are at school in your school from October through the assessment window, then they are considered in full academic year and then count in that. I do want to note that we can actually do some smart things here with district accountability, in that if a student is moving between schools within your district, they may not count for that school, but they will count for your district score. So there may be some slight differences in the number of students included in your schools, and you add up all the schools and they may not be there, but your district accounts for that student as well. We have a few things that we need to clarify here with reasons not tested, but we did add a COVID waiver, which was a flexibility that we wanted to make sure that we continued this last year. And then there are certain provisions for our recently arrived English learners that are included here as well. I'm going to keep moving, and I know sometimes scrolling while we go is always a little bit difficult, but I'm going to go through. So the improvement indicator, as we mentioned previously, we have taken out of our accountability system for this fall, and we can have discussions further about whether we would want to continue those. As we get to the growth indicator, this is specifically for elementary and middle schools. Growth is a student to student, year to year, year over year indication of whether they grew, as the name implies. I do want to make sure that it's clear that a student can count up to 2 times in the growth percentage for your school. Student may grow in math, they may also grow in ELA, or they may grow in one or the other, or neither, right? So there's sort of multiple measures of that student, whether they have grown. I want to make sure that you also see that growth scores do require that full academic year participation. So a student will only count, right, if they've been in your school, will only use that if they have been in your school for that whole time. And then I wanted to mention this table. So this table has not changed in our time that we have had our NSCAS system. And actually, I think this even harkens back to NISA. You'll see a couple of key changes, right? We have advanced, and then last year's was called CCR, but it's the same as advanced, right? And basically, this is a progression table where we see an amount of growth, right? So in the previous year, if a student was developing and they made a score gain, but still are in developing, they still count as growth. And obviously, if they were developing previously and this year are on track, they obviously made growth. Similarly, for if they if they stayed right in their higher performance levels. So if they were at CCR last year and CCR or now advanced this year, then that counts as growth. We want to provide that benefit of a student that has maintained their high level of achievement. Fantastic. We're kind of going fast here, you all, but I just want to again give you an opportunity to tour these business rules before we move to the ESSA designation ones as well. For graduation rate, recall that we use 4 and 7 year cohort graduation rates. There's lots of information. A lot of this requirements are from the federal government on how to count graduation rates and extended year graduation rates, et cetera. That is all included in the advisor resources here. And so I'd encourage you to look at that. One really important thing to note about high school graduation rates specifically is that just like every other state, we use lagging graduation data, meaning that it's 1 year behind for accountability. So for example, this fall of 2022, we will be using the spring of 2021 graduation rates in our designations and our classifications. And that's because we allow for adjusted graduation years, adjusted graduation. We allow you time into this fall for students to graduate over the summer, into the fall. If we waited for that graduation rate, we wouldn't have our classifications until December, January, or February. And so, like all other states that I know of, graduation rate lags by 1 year. I do want to note that, we have some very small schools in our state. So what we often do is, and again, this came from the original AQuest advisory group, was to look at multiple years of data for students and graduation rate for our smallest schools and sort of pool that all together. We know, again, it's not a perfect way to do it, but it is the only way that we're able to see sort of a trend in the support that a school may have for supporting their graduates. Non-proficiency is a trend line, right? And we hope that that trend line is going down. We want to see the number and the percent of non-proficient students go down. So non-proficiency is normally 3 years, but this year it's going to be 2 because we have 2 years of data, basically. And again, we're looking at that slope of time from year to year. There may be a time where schools don't have any growth. They don't have any reduction in non-proficiency. And so those students, that school then would not have a non-proficiency reduction. As we move towards conversations around progress toward English language proficiency, I want to share just a couple of things. And again, knowing that Allison is on this call as well and can field any questions, and will also provide deeper level of data from the Cambium website and show us how to access that more nuanced data. For the sake of accountability, we use the ELPA 21 assessment. And our goal is growth towards proficiency, or as the name implies, progress towards that English language proficiency. So recall that ELPA 21 measures a student's ability to read, write, speak, and listen in the English language. So we start off with the student's initial ELPA 21 baseline. That's their year 1, right? It's the first year of taking that assessment. And those students are not eligible for this accountability indicator because we're looking at, have they grown? So this is their first baseline. Okay. There are 3 levels in ELPA. There's emerging, progressing, and proficient. And we cut it a little bit further so that we can use this for accountability. Now, I will tell you, ELPA 21 was not created as a tool for accountability, but we have modified its calculations. We have modified these emerging and progressing levels to be then a few more, cut it a little bit more so that we can see where students are and we can track growth. So here you'll see that there are specific cut points, specific scores or scale scores that are at each of these grade levels. So we take that emerging, progressing, and then the proficient. We take emerging and progressing and split it. So we have emerging low and high, and then the requisite cut scores for each of those specific levels. So there's 2 things that happen, you all. First, we look at overall, is this student emerging, progressing, and proficient? If they're emerging, we then look at their scale score and their grade to determine where specifically they fall in this range of emerging low or emerging high. After that, we then look at specifically this table. We look specifically at this table and we look at their baseline year. We look at this baseline year and we look at then where they are in the subsequent year. So if a student started off as emerging low, the next year they should be emerging high, and a school would get a point for that student. Let's say 2 years pass and the student should be, let's say a new student, right? 2 years from now, they should be at progressing low. However, they're only at progressing high. So that student's off track. We want this student to be at progressing low, but they're only at progressing, emerging high, okay? So they would get a half point for that student. They would get a half point for that student because we want to honor that growth that they're making while also noting that they are not on track. Okay, so we do talk about that discussion down here, how we kind of put together the on-track students and the partially on-track students, etc. So that I'm happy to always dig back into that. We can show in our NEP Secure in a minute where that data is, etc. Because I know that was kind of confusing perhaps. So chronic absenteeism is a federally designated measure. We have no choice in determining the amount of chronic absence that is chronic absence. It is a federally designated classification. So it's when a student misses 10% or more of their time in membership. We look at specifically and consistent with federal guidance. If a student has been in the school for 10 days, then they are eligible for this indicator. So a student could be in school for 11 days, miss 2 days, and be chronically absent. You may have a student that is counted as chronically absent across multiple schools if they're moving from place to place. I want to note that the commissioner did put out some guidance, and he has re-upped this guidance this year on attendance during the pandemic. We understand and we acknowledge that there are times when students need to quarantine. We do also know that the CDC just put out new guidance on quarantine. And so this is not the time to be talking about that, but wanted to acknowledge that again, we have heard concerns about this, and we're digging in on this a little bit further as well. And we'll talk about the data that shows and where you can find the data on this as well. The chronic absence indicator for this year is basically going to be standardized, and there's some discussion on how that standardization works. But basically, we're going to be looking at a distribution of that chronic absenteeism and then standardizing the scores across that distribution. And then that will be used. And currently, we'll get down here when we talk about how these all come together. But that is currently going to be combined with ELPA 21, and I'll show you that here in just a moment. The last indicator here that is only used in classifications and not in the federal designations is the status indicator of science proficiency as well as science improvement. Which we're not able to do this year because we only have one set of science data. So this is very similar to the status indicator, which is why it's linked here. Basically, we look at the number of students that took the science assessment, and we look at the number that were proficient, and that gives us our science proficiency. And that will be used here for just the classifications. I see there's some comments in the chat, so I might pause for just a moment.
Yeah, Lane, we have a couple of questions in the chat. First, going back up to status, would you be able to describe or answer, if you can, will there be specific percentages for each of the classifications? So excellent, great, good, and needs improvement. Like, will it remain the same? The way I'm reading the question here for the district level. So provides an example of elementary schools needing to be 77% of their tests to be proficient to be an excellent school.
Yes, I'm guessing, I think I see that it was coming from this chart here. So, our accountability system always in the first year or the first time we run a new system, we usually force a distribution of schools, okay? And what I mean by that is in the past, the original AQuest advisory group from 2014 and 15 said we want 10, 40, 40, 10. 10% in needs improvement or needs support to improve, 40% of schools in that good, 40 in the great, and 10% in the excellent. And then we set it and forget it is what I would like to say, right? So that we then see any scores change. I mention that because these distributions or these sort of cuts here, so this is the status indicator score. So 70% of students that start in status in level 4 for elementary are proficient, right? So that's super high. These scores are the ones that we adjust when we start to get into that distribution. So we're going to start with the 70%, 77%, and we're going to just see where schools fall. This is about that modeling, right? So we'll start with the cuts that we have and see what we get, but we know that then we might have to adjust and tweak these a little bit to get the impact data that we think is closer to what is desirable, politically acceptable, as well as a reality for the supports that we at the NDE, you at your districts and at our ESUs could provide. So the short answer is that these may change, but we are going to have to we're just going to have to see.
There's another question related to EL proficiency. So students who are at emerging are most likely not proficient on their state assessment. So there's a question or wondering, should emerging students be exempt from state accountability?
Great question. So they actually are if they are a recently arrived English learner. So I'm going to stop sharing, go back up to where we talk about status. And I think I'm understanding your question, right? We look at an exemption for, and we have an exemption, this isn't new, but we do have an exemption for students that are recently arrived English learners. So in the first year that student comes, they take the assessments, but they don't count. Okay, so they don't count in participation, they don't count in status or growth. They basically have a baseline. Okay, so this is an English learner who's taking the NSCAS assessment. In their second year, we only look at progress. Okay, in their second year, we only look at progress measures. So that's growth and that's non-proficiency. Okay. In their third year, they count in both growth and status and every other accountability indicator. That is a federal rule that we take advantage of. And I may have misspoken. They may count in participation in year one. I will clarify that and make sure I get back to you. I hope that answered your question on that, if it was specific to NSCAS.
Yeah, so the next question is related to if schools will have to have less chronically absent students and a standardized amount. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how chronic absence is going to be calculated.
Yep, I'm trying to get there. So yeah, so this is a difficult area, right? Because it's not a new indicator, but it's a new way of calculating that indicator. So essentially what we will be doing is creating a normal curve for our chronic absenteeism, right? And trying to understand where and how our schools fall along that. So just again, a reminder, we had a lot of chronic absenteeism and it was distributed across the state. We had 77,000 students that were chronically absent. We know that's almost double the amount. And so we anticipate that it's going to be more of a right skewed sort of distribution. keep in mind that like our goal with this year's accountability is to focus on the schools that had the most impacted students by the pandemic, which means that, you know, we think 50% chronic absence is really high, but we had some districts and schools that had 70, 80, 90% chronic absence. And those will be the ones that are at the far end of the distribution. Again, you can see that guidance on how we're going to standardize the score on this. And I was this close to having just a little slide about standardization and what that means, and then what that looks like and how the score can be interpreted. But for now, I'll just say that, you know, a high chronic absence rate is what we're really looking towards. We're trying to understand and find, once again, those schools that have the highest chronic absences. So that was sort of an answer to your question, I'll say.
There's another question related to back to that chart on 18 that had the cut points between status classifications. If those percentages change, when would we know about that?
Yep, good question. So again, we have the assessment data. Our goal is to start running those calculations and to have then the impact data, meaning how does moving elementary score from 77 to, you know, 57, how does that impact? How many more schools are excellent, right? So we'll be able to do those calculations. We'll probably share that back out with the AAA, the Assessment and Accountability Advisory Committee, so that we can validate those scores and those ranges soon. So I would say even within this month and early September, our assessment team and our data research and evaluation team are actively cleaning and applying cut points to our English language arts and math data, and combining that data with our alternate assessment for our students with the most significant or profound disabilities. So that's like, we're working on this actively. And then the next step for us is going to be putting it into the I think it's SQL is what Max uses, and seeing what it spits out. Again, starting with the 77 and then sort of moving from there.
Great. So there was a question around the percentages for the targets for this year and whether or not they had changed. And then I'm glad I asked for clarification. So the percentages between each of the categories, so that distribution of 10, 40, 40, 10, and wondering if that in fact did change, and if so, what implications does that have for these pieces here you just talked about?
You bet. So the question is referring to one that we posed to our Assessment and Accountability Advisory Committee, which was, what would be a true and acceptable distribution? Is 10, 40, 40, 10 where we should shoot for? Once again, knowing that it's not ideal to like force that distribution, but we have to, or we want to, I guess is what I would say in this first year of running this system. We asked the question, like, what would a better distribution or a more acceptable distribution be? And would it make more sense to have, you know, 6%, 7% of schools in that needs improvement category? Also knowing that we have limited capacity as districts, as ESUs, and as NDE to support a ton of schools, right? In a different nuanced way. The decision hasn't been made. We're presenting the recommendation to the commissioner, who will present that recommendation to the state board on adjusted distribution. And again, that will be communicated once we know some of the impact data from these calculations. It's our contention that we really want to focus on the schools that most need our support. That's always what we want to do, but specifically this year, it's critical. So we'll make that recommendation based on the feedback that we had from the AAA, and communicate that back as soon as we can. Does that take us to our questions, through our questions? Okay, perfect. So I am actually going to go ahead and move then. Well, I'd want to talk quickly about, we do share then some of the other adjustments here. So remember, we'll actually show a graphic here in a little bit. We show, we start always with status and then do a series of bumps up or bumps down as the case may be. Again, knowing that these scores may need to be adjusted again based on our conversation. And I understand like the need to know like, well, when, right? And so we want to get that information. We're going to be running, we have already been running some early information on this. Understand too, my last comment on this, and then we'll switch to the designation business rules. We are slightly paused on the classification because we don't have our science data yet. So our state board approved cut scores for the science assessment for grades 5 and 8, as well as our alternative assessment there, and on Friday of last week. So we are waiting for that data to show back up and for us to then be able to kind of work with that to include in this system. Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure that you all have the ability to see and review these as soon as you'll see there's already some comments. We've shared this out with some folks to get some more specific and nuanced feedback. And I want to just spend just a brief moment talking through the ESSA designation business rules as well. A lot of the changes that you'll note in here are reflected in our slides from our session yesterday, which was all about the changes that were made because of the addendum. So that we submitted to the US Department of Education. So you'll see these X's through the lines through the indicators that we have. I'll make this just a little bit bigger. The indicators that have changed as a result of the pandemic, right? And then basically we use the same indicators from our classification business rules over to here. So this is where we detail, and we'll have to be updating our, here's our student groups, our N size. We'll be updating our graphics to the new filters, right? Those need to be updated. And then folks, I want to make sure that I point out that, like, again, these cut scores by which each of these schools are going to be compared will also be updated, okay? And we'll have that data soon as well. Specifically, the Title I schools, Shirley, I'm wondering if you would talk just a little bit specifically about why we use Title I schools specifically for CSI, and then I'll get down to ATSI as well.
Yeah, so Title I schools are used as the metric specifically for CSI, since that is an intervention, so to speak, that the US Department of Education is saying, we need to focus on schools that are serving students that are experiencing poverty or economically disadvantaged. So we want to make sure that we are providing the appropriate amount of access and opportunities for students to learn and demonstrate that mastery of learning. So that is one of the main reasons why that is the comparison group. I mean, besides the fact that we're told by the US Department of Education that that is the group that we are to use as our comparison. Did you ask me to say something else too?
No, thank you. That's helpful. And then for additional targeted support and improvement, again, we have to use Title I schools as the comparison group. And that's because of this sentence right here. Federal law says that schools with a student group that would on their own be identified for CSI, right? So if that student group were a school by themselves, they would be identified for CSI. So CSI schools are the lowest 5% of Title I schools. Again, we have no choice in this additional targeted support and improvement. It's unfortunate to compare, and I understand that there's some consternation around comparing, for example, students with disabilities to the lowest 5% of Title I schools, but that's what we have to do, because we're looking at if this student group, if these students with disabilities were by themselves in a school, they would be identified for CSI. ATSI has a much stronger implication. It's a much greater flag or signal for schools that there is specific attention that needs to be paid to that student group and that specific student group. So I just want to, I sound like a broken record, but I want to reiterate again, additional targeted support and improvement with our 10 student groups, our 7 racial and ethnic groups, our economically disadvantaged students, our English learners, and our students with disabilities, right? If that specific student group by themselves would be CSI, then they are identified for additional targeted support and improvement. And that's why the comparison group is the lowest 5% of Title I schools. I do think that we have some flexibility with our targeted support and improvement, okay? So targeted support and improvement is also a flag. It also indicates that there are underperformance issues for a specific student group. And the bar is slightly different. So we look at a student group that is in the lowest quarter of Title I schools. So it's slightly different than what we do with additional targeted support and improvement. I think as we talk about revising our accountability system in the long term with an ESSA plan revision, we can talk specifically about targeted support and improvement and whether or not this Title I schools is the appropriate comparison or could be tweaked slightly differently on that. So once again, these filters will be updated. A lot of this information will be updated. And then certainly these cut points will also be updated because we have to see specifically what is the lowest quarter of Title I schools? How are they performing? What is the status of the lowest 25% of Title I schools? And that's what these cut scores are here. So that's a lot, you all, and sort of a high-level overview of our business rules. I'm sure there are further questions, and I want to continue to engage. And if you would like to be a person to review our business rules and add some additional context or clarity, I welcome your input and for you to reach out on that. I'm happy to share those with you. So, all right, Shirley, do you want to share back your screen?
Yes, there's a question around, is progress towards English proficiency in the achievement or academic progress indicator? It's actually in the first stage, which is with status.
And that is a federal requirement as well. Shirley, if you share back your screen to slide 8, that will show where English language proficiency is. We had originally wanted in our design to have ELP as its own stage, like sort of a mini stage. And we got the pushback from the feds that we actually had to include it in that first stage.
Okay, so now, Lane, you can monitor the chat. Okay, perfect. So we want to just point your attention to some of the data and resources that we have available, and with the caveat that we know we can do a much better job at bringing these things together in one place, really helping schools make sense of all this data. And we first want to start with the public facing view of the NEP, so the Nebraska Education Profile. And this being a tool that is available for anyone and everyone. And we do have on the NEP public, just like, little text boxes that make sure people understand how to interpret the data that they see, specifically for the past couple of years when assessment and federal accountability has had to have been adjusted. So just offer that as a quick reminder and as a quick refresher around the NEP public specifically. So then we want to get into actually, well, where do you access data? Where do you access reports? Where do you access information related to classifications and designations? So here's just a quick screenshot, and Lane, like we talked about before, we'll go back and forth between our screens. but you'll see the NEP portal. And the portal is essentially the gateway to get to these different reports and different platforms. So in the portal, you have the data collections under which you can access NEP Secure, and you'll see in subsequent slides what information you can get there. And in the third tab, excuse me, you see students and staff, or NSSRS, and that's where you can access the advisor validation, where you can see more of the up-to-date and more recent information related to the variety of data points that you submit to the ND, but also things that are used to inform accountability classifications and designations.
Nope, that's great. So do you want me to show my screen really quickly, Shirley? Okay, so once again, the portal, and you will sign in here. Our plan is to also do just like a short video, like less than 5 minutes, around how to access the portal, how to navigate the NEP Secure, and what that might look like. We'll do a shorter version so that folks don't have to watch this 1.5-hour long version here. So when signing into the portal, as Shirley mentioned, specifically on the NEP Secure, if you do not have access to specifically the NEP Secure, you'll have to get a code from your superintendent. And if you need help with that, you can always reach out to the advisor help desk. But as this loads, and sometimes it takes just a minute to load, again, this NEP Secure is exactly what it sounds like. It's the behind the scenes of the NEP public. Provides unmasked data, so you have to be very careful with what you show and who you show it to if you're recording. That's why we have screenshots coming up here in a moment, hopefully, with it loading. And as Shirley also mentioned, while that's loading, the NSSRS with the advisor validation, once again, you will have to get some specific codes. There's multiple codes for advisor validation: special education data, free and reduced price lunch data, as well as assessment, graduation rates, etc. Okay, hopefully our NEP Secure loads here. Of course, this happens. Here we go. Okay, so on this home page, kind of catch-all page, the first thing that you'll see, you will only have access to your specific schools here, right? So you'll pick your specific school. I'm just going to pick a random school, just so that you can see. We won't actually use their data here. And then you'll have multiple years of data to choose from. I'm just going to show you specifically how to then, you'll click on the access to the AQuest report, which will pull up then this classification report. So once again, I just picked a random school to show you then again how to do that. It's going to be really important too that you pick the year, and we'll have obviously a new year that says 21-22 in there. And then you'll click on the AQuest classification report. I'm going to turn it back to Shirley's slides now so that you can see some snapshots of a different school, a random school.
Yeah, so we definitely didn't want to use any information that could be easily identifiable. So we did a lot of screenshots, scrubbing out information, and then using that to provide examples. And just, you've already seen this, Lane took you there. We just wanted to quickly show you again some screenshots, especially for those who may be joining us later, can actually see what these things look like. And then school name, we've identified the year 2018-19 and see the AQuest classification report. Just as a quick reminder, we just want to show you, right, what are the data points that go into that AQuest report. So we start with status, we go through a series of bumps, and then obviously in the past we had the EBA, and then we'll have the final classification. And then what we want to show you here in this next slide are two screenshots of two different schools. So one is a middle school and one is a high school. And what you see, we start with status, and this should all be similar with what we just talked about in our business rules, right? Where we start with status first, and then we make a series of adjustments. And you'll see in the middle school, there were no adjustments made. They remained as a raw classification for needs improvement. Their final classification was needs improvement. What we see in the high school, they started with a status of 3. There was an adjustment made for educational opportunities and access. that is most likely related to graduation. And we'll see that their raw classification and final classification was actually an excellent. So this is just the first page of the screenshot of that specific school that we let you select, but that we selected for the purposes of this demonstration. On this next slide, then what we see, and then in the report that you would see when you download that report, are a series of pages that break down every specific indicator there for you so that you are able to see, well, how did I get here? And then how is that cut score from the business rule applied? So that we understand how that then gets us to a specific rating for that tenant and whether or not we receive a specific adjustment or not. So here we see from the status indicator, the number of students that were eligible, the number of students that were proficient for both assessments in math and ELA, and then the total. And that's how we arrive to that percentage of proficient. And then we see how the business rules applied, the particular cut score, and how that led to that rating. And then we also see we just added, it's on the same page, so we added the participation one as well since it's there. Would you like to add anything, Lane, or no? Great. Okay, I'm also noticing time and making sure we have time for our 2 folks that are here as well. So to make things super simple, even though it's an oversimplification of this, right? But just from a quick look, right? You just ask yourself, right? What does this data make you wonder about, right? So just off the cuff, looking at this, I wonder why there is a difference between the number of proficient students in math and ELA. Regardless, it's still, I'd love to know more about what we can do around ELA, but nonetheless, I'm seeing there's a difference between math and ELA, and it makes me wonder, is math something that we need to dig more into? Yes. No, who knows, right? And these are conversations that you should be having with your teams and knowing that this is just the beginning and it's not all of the possible data you have that can let you know why we are seeing the outcome that we're seeing. And join us at 11 if you want to keep talking more about digging deep into root causes. Okay. So then we also want to take a screenshot because on that first page on below where you would see your final classification, you will see these 2 pieces broken out where you see whether or not a school was designated as a CSI school, and it breaks down the different stages for the CSI schools. And then you also see the breakdown for targeted and additional targeted support. So you'll see, like we said, the N size being 10. And for example, for this middle school, for English learners, there were too few students, so they weren't even eligible for that designation. However, we do see as we go down that the school was designated for both TSI and ATSI. So as a school leader, I may wonder, like, wow, what's going on with this? And as a district leader, I want to make sure I pay close attention to this school, because when a school does not exit TSI after 3 years, they become a CSI school, right? So we want to make sure we're providing the appropriate supports for our schools, and then also wondering what it looks like at the intersection, right? We see students with disabilities. We also see economically disadvantaged and different racial and ethnic groups identified. So just a couple of things to consider here. And this is all on the NEP Secure under the AQuest report. Now we're going to make a transition to advisor validation. And where you saw on the prior slide, we get that under the NSSRS tab and click advisor validation there. Want me to just keep going? Okay, so under advisor validation, Lane mentioned you need the specific code to access. Once you do, you select your, you'll have access to your district. You want to make sure that you select the appropriate school year and an option, right? These reports are here for your viewing and for your consumption, and student attendance summary helps us to understand, not only the number of days that a child has been enrolled and the number of days they've been present, but whether or not they've been flagged as chronically absent, right? So we just wanted to show you a quick example here. You see no identifiable information, but you do see that there is one student, right there, that's immediately flagged on this sheet for being chronically absent. Another piece to consider is that there may be more students, right, that are also chronically absent, but maybe haven't met a particular threshold. So it's important for us to continue to understand the proactive measures to ensure we're supporting our students. And it looks like Lane has a comment.
Yeah, I would be remiss if I did not mention that it's really important for our districts to look through this attendance summary document before signing off on their data. So while schools may not show any errors in Advisor, there may be errors within this document. We had a couple of schools that had 0 absences reported. We had a couple of schools that had 100% chronically absent students. So there's clearly an error between what was being sent from the student information system to Advisor. It was worked out, they found it, and then we had accurate data. But those superintendents had already signed off on the data, which creates some issues. So we want to make sure, I just want to say it as many times as I can, that though there may not be any like errors showing up on Advisor, it's absolutely critical that you look at these reports and encourage your superintendents or data stewards to look at the reports before signing off that the data is correct.
Awesome, thanks, Lane. And then the next piece we'll just quickly show you before we turn it over to our colleagues. First is a download report that is super useful for school and district leaders in understanding the different students in your school that took the assessment and how those specific scores were then used in the classification designation, and really understand like, well, where do I need to target my support, like as a starting point? So the pathway to arrive to this download NSCAS assessment result is right here below. Could you take 1 minute, Lane? Like 1 minute, because we could do this for hours, and we did for many schools who called upon us to provide some direct support on not only the access, but also the interpretation of this report specifically.
Yes, give me 1.5 minutes and I'll be able to do it. No, just kidding. I can do it in a minute if you'll give me access to share my screen. So here is that document that we downloaded, and then we anonymized it, you all, so that we could show you this, where this is all of my districts data, right? So I'm going to create a new filter, and I'm just going to show you the power of this document. I'm able to then say I want to zero in on elementary school students. And then I really specifically want to focus in on the subject. And where did I see the subject? Right here. I want to do ELA, math, or science. Let's just look at ELA and math. I want to really look in at my students with disabilities. And I also want to see my students with disabilities who are also receiving free and reduced price lunch, right? So that narrows. And then over here, I'm able to see their performance. So I have 3, which is advanced, 2, which is on track, and then the 1, which is on developing. Yeah. So there's a lot of power in this document. Obviously, it's like student level data. You can look at race and ethnicity. There's multiple different flags across your students. Full academic year is included here as well. And so this is a tool that if you're really looking for a way to disaggregate your data, to find those intersections, it's right here at your fingertips.
Awesome, thank you. And we also know with our transition to NSCAS growth that we do have a platform that is a little bit more dynamic than our Excel sheet that you saw here. So I'm actually going to turn it over to our colleague, Ali, and see if, there you are, hey. So to take us through some of the things you have at your fingertips, right, literally, and the power that lives in this platform.
Thank you, Lane and Shirley. I'm glad to be here this morning with you all. So I figured we'll just go through the platform, show you some of the highlights, and then I will take you through some of the resources. So let me share my screen here. Okay. So when you look into the system, you log in and you have your choices, you have your menu, you can navigate on the tree, or I just come down here to view reports. And you select, we have all the different reports up here, the organization report, the student report, growth reports, demographic reports, and coming soon are going to be the ISR reports. So I will select a district view, 3rd grade. Let's go to ELA. And then I can select the groups that I want. I want all groups. So looking at the assessment, it'll tell me what schools are in which range. I can also print this report out, download it as a PDF. So I'm gonna look at my 2 schools here that are in developing. This is a beta environment, so it's not gonna be exactly lined up. I didn't want to use real data. So let's just go to Anderson Middle School. Let's look at our 3 developing students. So from here, I can see their scale score, their achievement level, their range, and then their reporting categories. I from here can go into the students directly. So I can see the individual student report. So this is looking at their spring results. I do have a growth measurement. I have their overall NSCAS score. It tells me their achievement level. It gives me an estimated RIT and a percentile. I can see the 3 reporting categories and the 2 estimated RITs, and then I get a item response. I also wanted to point out from here, when we're looking at maybe reading vocabulary, if I wanted to see more help with that, I would go into the Achievement Level Explorer tool. So this is a tool that will help people look at the achievement level descriptors. We're in ELA. And so I'm in vocabulary, and it's going to tell me what on track, developing, and our advanced achievement level descriptors of those are. So that's going to help go in and dig into those standards and see what we might be needing. I do see a few questions in chat.
Yeah, Ali, this is phenomenal. Such a cool tool, and just really appreciate you sharing that with us. Want to make sure, first question was, NWEA is printing the ISR reports and sending them to districts, right?
That is correct.
And then will science scores be in the NSCAS reports once those are scored?
Once they are released. Yep, once all the
Okay.
data is released, the science will be included.
Awesome. And then is the estimated RIT available anywhere else beside the individual student report?
Yes, so we are definitely working on that so that we get estimated RITs in more places. And so that's going to be more easily accessible for folks. And then you will be able to see those when they're available. So looking at getting estimated RITs definitely in more places than just that individual student report is something that we've heard and that we want to do for you.
Perfect. Couple more questions. First, this is a internal prototype, so this isn't a real person, correct, that we're seeing?
Correct. No,
Okay, just wanted to make that clear to folks.
It's not real data.
Perfect. And then a couple of questions. Will we get state percentiles based on NSCAS scale score?
I will have to take that back. I am
Okay.
not sure about that one. So a state percentile.
Yep, a state percentile based on NSCAS scale scores. Thanks for taking that back, and we can follow up with attendees.
Yep.
And then a question about when will our district's systems match what you're showing on this screen?
So that I don't have an exact release date on here. So this is what this is the beta environment, because I didn't want to go live and show any student data. So this is just a training environment that we're looking at, but they will be working on these. And then can we get a document that summarizes the individual percentile by building? Heidi, do you want to explain? I'm not following that question, sorry.
And maybe for the sake of time, we can actually follow up. We'll have Ali's contact information in the chat, as well as it's on this slides here as well. So we can follow up on that one specifically, okay?
Sounds good. Okay.
Fantastic.
So
thanks, Ali.
Yep. The last piece that I wanted to make sure that everyone new knows about is the demographic report. So we have the student report that I just showed, our growth report. So I'm going to look at one student. So there's the growth report that's available, and you can toggle between the winter assessment and their spring assessment and see how they're growing. And then also wanted to show the new demographic report that gives information about third grade ELA. Let's look at Abilene. And so you're going to have the demographics broken down by male and female, by our ethnicity and race groups, and by our targeted groups. And so you'll be able to dig in a little bit deeper. You'll see how many students completed, what their average scale score was, what the breakdown of developing, on track, and advanced, and then the reporting categories for each subgroup. So you'll have more information for you on that piece. So the last piece that I wanted, we showed the achievement level descriptors. Just wanted to show the connection section on the web page, and I can put this link in the chat for everyone. This is kind of your one-stop shop for anything NSCAS. If you have not bookmarked this location, you're going to want to make sure that you do. This is a great treasure trove of information. So we have the item type sampler, we have information about the platform, there's dedicated support, and then we have PL. So majority of you are going to want to come down to the assessment coordinators tab. This is going to have all of your information about MAP growth and NSCAS growth. So we have the vignettes, we have the comparison chart of MAP growth compared to NSCAS growth. And then here's those resources. We have the coordinator's guide, the student management guide, the technology guide, roles and permissions, the checklist. We have the latest training administration PowerPoint. If you wanted to take some of those slides back to your staff, we have the PowerPoint, and then we have the full administration video, and then we have some of those external partner training videos. The last thing that I wanted to show today, which is going to be really helpful, is the reports interpretive guide. This interpretive guide is going to go through all of the different reports and show you what we have for the state. Let me just get to the top of the page here. We're just going to go up to. So it's going to talk about your growth assessments, the content standards, achievement reporting, how we set the cut scores, the estimated RIT scores, talks about the student report, the growth report, and then those organization reports at the state, region, district, school, and teacher level. So those are all going to be gone through and described and detailed out. So this is a new document that's available. It has the cut scores, it has the descriptors, and then it has all of the reports. So we can look at the growth report. Any other questions? I just wanted to do a quick highlight of resources and what's available for you to look at.
Awesome. We appreciate it, Allie. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this info. And we know that more information is forthcoming, so we'll at least hold our excitement until then. I not seeing any questions now, so I'm going to actually then turn it over to our colleague Allison Denbesti and talk to us a little bit about our ELPA 21 assessment. And I'll turn it over to you, Allison.
Good morning. Thank you, Shirley. So hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. Nice to have a little bit of time this morning. Shirley, can I go ahead and share my screen? I am going to do just a really quick overview of the reporting feature of the ELPA 21 portal. I put the homepage address in the chat, and just a couple of things I would point out for anyone who may be unfamiliar. I recommend on the homepage registering for email updates that will keep you informed with important dates and things that change. In my experience, they don't bombard you with unnecessary emails, so you don't need to be concerned about that. The other section of the portal that I think is very helpful is this resources section. So I'm going to go through a really quick high-level view of the reporting section. Everything that you could ever need to administer the ELPA 21, either the screen or the summative, the reports, all of it is located here. And so, for example, a user guide would be helpful if you want to just search for. I do recommend filtering and searching, otherwise you can kind of get lost in here. Here's a quick guide to the reporting system. There's the full user guide. There are also training modules if you just want PowerPoints, especially. If you might be responsible for training others in your district, you can just pull down these PowerPoints. You can edit them as needed. So anything that you might want in the way of resources is found on the ELPA 21 portal. To access it, I'm going to go back to home. There's a couple of different ways. You can go from the top. For the most part, you will always access as a test administrator. The only exception might be if you need to install secure browsers. Those are found from the technology coordinator site. If you'd like to provide access to resources for families, including practice tests, you certainly can share this. There's nothing secure about the homepage. So when I log in here, it's really divided into 3 sections. First of all, announcements appear at the top, but then we go into the components of the portal you need in preparation for testing, actually administering tests themselves, and then after testing. Secure portions are designated by the little padlock. We're going to go into the reporting section today. You would log in. If you forgot your password, click here. You'll be emailed a link to reset it. You have to do that at the start of every school year anyway. So hopefully you can get in. If you have any trouble, just reach out and we can get you set up. So just as with the other reports, you will have access to your district. We do have a demo district that operates as a sandbox that allows us to share and show these results. And so that's where I'm at today. The reporting system will default to the current school year. And so if I want to look at last year's summative scores, I'm going to change the reporting time period. I could do it with this link, or I could come over here to the features and tool. Both will take me to the same place. The second box sometimes trips people up. View results for students who were mine on a certain day. If I'm looking at information for last year, I'm going to plug in a date from last year. May 1st was still part of the window. We were getting scores about that time. I tend to default to that date if I'm looking at a previous date. And so now you can see that I have results for summative or screener. I really just want to look at the summative scores. And this allows you to drill down. You could use filters. And again, if I change my mind and I think I might want to look at the screener, I could do it here. I'm going to stick with the summative. And they will appear by grade level. Now, notice in this demo data, I don't have too many students, so it's not going to be as robust as your district probably is. I can keep drilling down if I want to look at the performance of my kindergartners. This district has 2 schools. I do get a nice overview that compares the overall scale scores. This is the score that Advisor uses or as part of AQuest to determine students who are on track towards English language proficiency. So the overall scale score is an important number. I could see my school's average, I can see my district's average, I can see my state's average. There's also a nice graphic of a performance distribution that shows what percentage of students were categorized in each of the overall proficiency determinations: emerging, progressing, and proficient. So I'm going to click on Demo School 2 because there are 7 students there and it'll give us a little bit more to look at. I can click, just continue to drill down. A lot of times we're looking for an individual student ISR. So when I get to the point where I've just got one student here, I can come over to the features and tools and I can download student results. One of the changes that was implemented this year with the portal, it will default to a student data. So it would come up as a spreadsheet. If I just want to see that individual student report, all I have to do is click here. Notice that the reports are available in several different languages as well. And this is really nice when we're sending them home to families. So I may have to go back and select the school. Once I've done that, my generate button appears. It is now processing that ISR for me. And there is an inbox within the reporting system. This is where the score is going to appear. So I have a notification that score is available now. And there it is. Lane mentioned earlier the on track status. This does appear on the individual score report. So this would be the number that you would use if you were looking at that table to say, first of all, this student is emerging. So I'm going to have to look in one of the two emerging columns, look at the kindergarten grade, and then find where this overall scale score comes into play. And there's a couple other features as well. I'm going to back out just a little bit so I have a little bit more student data. If I want to compare the performance of different groups, I could do that. Maybe I want to compare girls versus boys. I could do that by selecting gender. If I wanted to compare ethnicities, SPED indicator, all of that will give us a breakdown to show us females. There were 5. 2 of those were at the emerging level and 3 were at progressing. There were 2 males. And in this instance, both males were at the emerging level. There is the ability to add rosters within the ALPA 21 system. It's not something we see a lot of with Nebraska schools, but my suggestion to you would be, first of all, look at your program, see if it makes sense for you. If you typically use rosters for NWEA, you could do a similar option here. You could add a roster. It's simply a matter of naming the roster and then selecting the students that you would want to, I may have, oh there, it just took a minute, that you want to add to that roster. You can manage the rosters that way, and that way underneath the school, you would have individual rosters rather than just all of those students who appear without. So if I wanted to add a roster, first I'm going to create it. I would go through the process of selecting my school, give the roster a name, assign it to a teacher, and then you can put your students in there. So I don't know if we have any specific questions. The performance by student would give you historical information to show all of the now I'm in kindergarten. This is probably not a great year to pull up because I'm not going to have a lot of historical data. But if this were an older student and we had several years worth of the ALPA 21 summative, I could filter down by year over here and I could pull up each year's report for that student. And so sometimes that's nice to track that over time. Looks like there's something. Thank you, Lane. Yes, feel free to share any questions. I want to mention, if you're not aware of the ALPA 21 on track report in Advisor, it is a student verification report. It's one that was created by NDE's data team. And I think right now we have about 4 years worth of data in it. And so I think it's a helpful tool for a couple of different reasons. You'll notice the reporting feature of the ALPA 21 portal provides a separate file for every grade level. If you want one district data file that has all of your grades in one spreadsheet, you can get it from the Advisor report. It also will show the students who are considered on track, those who would be considered not on track, and those who are considered partial progress, as those maybe who weren't making the expected level of gains, but they still are making gains. It's in Advisor. It does require access. There's a lot of student data in there. I don't have demo data to show you, but I will tell you, I'll put my contact information in the chat. If you have any questions about that report, or if you would like for me to walk through your data with you, I would be more than happy to do so. Just reach out and let me know. Thank you, Shirley. I see you beat me to it.
We got your back here. Thank you, Allison, so much. I am appreciative of both Allie and Allison of joining us here today. I'm going to quickly share my screen to just wrap everything up with a quick bow here. I've put the link that Allie shared with us on the bottom here, and we'll make sure that when we share the PowerPoint and the video that all these links are live, and also her contact information along with Allison's contact information and the link as well to this portal. So make sure we bookmark those pages and follow up with those, follow up with them if you have any specific questions to those specific resources. So just to wrap up in the chat, quick reflections, thinking about what are you still wondering related to the data sources as well as the business rules. What are some things that we could do to continue to make the information clearer? We're always looking to engage in process improvement, also document improvement. And then lastly, are there other additional tools or resources that would be useful for you that we haven't mentioned, or that maybe we should really consider doing something about? So take maybe like 2-3 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, and jot some of those things down in the chat, and then we can have a quick convo.
Yeah, as you're filling that in, first, thank you, Allie and Allison. The tools that we have at our fingertips are super helpful. Shirley and I provided you sort of a global perspective on the accountability data availabilities on the NEP Secure, the Advisor, and some of those reports that you're able to then manipulate. But truly the data that and the sources that Allie and Allison provided are much more powerful and provide that improvement data that we're going to be talking about at our next session at 11. There's a question here about, will we share another version of the business rules? We'll probably share 3 more versions of the business rules. So as you saw, I had some folks take a look at the business rules to give me some feedback. And so we'll be working through those suggestions, responding to some of the wonderings, et cetera. We'll also be adjusting some of those cut points and want to look at impact data and get that sort of validated by the AAA. So we may have a assessment and accountability advisory committee at some point soon. I'm going to sneeze, so apologies. So we will have additional outreach to folks on those business rules, and certainly they will be posted on the AQuest website. Yeah. Currently, if you would like to see the business rules in their like super rough form, meaning that they have not been updated, they are on our AQuest website, and they are in the resources section under AQuest key information, and you'll see that they're clearly labeled 2018 and 19 business rules. And then there's a CSI, TSI, and ATSI designation business rules. By the way, this AQuest page that I just shared in the chat is also going to be where these videos and our slides are posted. We'll have a new heading for 2022, key info, and so you'll see a lot of these resources there. What additional thoughts might you have in the chat?
Definitely got some affirmation around creating some tutorial related to accessing the NEP Secure for like new school leaders, just so that they understand where to access the information, and then they know how to communicate around it.
You bet. Happy to do that. It was on my list, and we'll make sure to get that out so that we can share how to get access to the NEP and then how to interpret the NEP. I might do 2 separate short videos on that as well. Well, we want to be respectful of folks' time. You know how to get a hold of Shirley and me. So our email addresses are here. Certainly reach out with any questions or additional information or responses to those 3 reflections. As I mentioned, I'll be following up with some folks on business rules, and we'll make sure to get those emailed out. Really appreciate your time and attention. It's a great group of people that push us to be better. And so really appreciate your time and attendance. As a reminder, our final session is at 11 o'clock, and it is focused on the what now, using AQuest to inform improvement efforts. So we hope you can join us at 11, and we'll see you soon. Take care.